Today, Dr. Leif Dahleen shares insights from his financial independence journey, the principles of FATFIRE, and what his life is like after official retirement. Here we go. Welcome to the Forget About Money podcast, where we encourage you to take action today so that you can focus on what matters most to you. On this episode, we have Leif Dahleen, also known as the Physician on Fire. Leif retired from his anesthesiology profession 5 years ago and has been living the FI life ever since. Today, we cover his journey to financial independence through his challenging career, his transition into the retired life, and the advice he would provide a young adult contemplating a career in the medical profession. Welcome, Leif. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, David, and thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be among the early guests in your podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for taking the time. It's been a while since we've spoken, and we've always had good conversations, whether it's campfire or even over email or telephone. So thank you for being a friend over the years, and we've seen each other transition through different aspects of this journey. So it's nice to share that experience with somebody else along the way.
For sure, yeah. Like our friendship goes back to the very first campfire in Gainesville, Florida. Some, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, probably.
Well, today we're going to talk about like how you discovered financial independence, and we'll get right into it. How far along in your career as an anesthesiologist were you when you discovered the idea that you could save aggressively and buy back your time, leading to financial independence?
I had been working as an anesthesiologist out of residency from 2006, I finished, until this was about late 2014, early 2015 when I discovered, the Mr. Money Mustache website, and then branched out from there and read a lot about this whole concept of financial independence. And so I guess 8-9 years in is where I was at. And I had already been saving aggressively. I wasn't necessarily quite sure what I was saving for, but I was spending what I wanted, raising a family, not depriving ourselves in any way, but probably saving as much or more than I was spending on an anesthesiologist's salary.
When you had this epiphany about early retirement, what immediate changes, if any, did you make in your lifestyle and finances? And how did your family feel about it, or your wife?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's probably the first thing I did once I really truly ran the numbers and read, numerous different resources to make sure this was a real thing. But once I was confident about our financial independence and our ability to kind of do whatever we wanted, because like I said, I was saving all along the way, close to 10 years into my career. I really had achieved financial independence about the time that I discovered it. And so, I had to talk with my wife, and I said, if I didn't have a job, how could life look differently? And at the time, we've got 2 boys, and they were maybe 4 and 6 years old, something like that. This is almost 10 years ago. And so we thought, well, maybe we make a 5-year plan. And when they're kind of through grade school, going into those middle school, junior high years, which can be awkward for everybody. And, they're old enough to maybe appreciate a little bit of culture and history. Like we could travel, right? And, there are no remote jobs for anesthesiology. Realistically, you can't intubate or place epidurals or do nerve blocks from a distance. So I really knew the only way to do that would be to move on from that career. And financially, I knew we could afford it. So did I make any changes? I paid more attention, I guess, to, where the money was at, and made damn sure we would be more than okay. Like I said, I was about FI when I discovered it. Worked another almost 5 years. And by then we were more like double FI, if you will.
Yeah. So your habits ahead of time were already locked in. You just didn't know exactly like where the goalpost was until you saw the Mr. Money Mustache article. I'm assuming it's the Shockingly Simple Math article.
That's a great article. Yeah. Shockingly Simple Math Behind Early Retirement, I think it is. I discovered it more through mainstream media, right? Because I wasn't going to blogs until I found an article on, might have been like Money Magazine or one of those types of things that was featuring him. And then that led me to his blog where I found that article and others. And then other people like Mad Scientist and Root of Good, and a handful of others that were around at the time. Retire by 40 was another one.
Mm-hmm.
These were all around back in, I found it in 2014, 2015. A lot of them started 2011, 2012, about that time frame.
For me, whenever I was I kind of knew a lot of this stuff, like basic financial management, like I'm sure you did. But once you hear the traditional advice of save 10 to 15% of your money until you're 65, and then you can golf until you're dead or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that still that's really the only guidelines that I ever found in books, that I read from in the 90s to the early 2000s. And then so I was like, okay, but I'm objective. I think about the objective and backwards plan, and that's no strategy to backwards plan. So what I loved about the financial independence space, particularly that article by Mr. Money Mustache, was that here's the goalpost, here's the logic behind it, and now you have an actual objective to work towards. Now, in your case, your habits already got you to that objective and then some without you even necessarily consciously recognizing it. You just ran the numbers kind of after the fact, oh yeah, well, we've met that objective and then some, which gives us some more options to plan. And you said this was about 10 years ago. You and your wife put in the 5-year plan, and then you've been retired for 5 years. So it seems like everything is going pretty good to plan.
Yeah, things did go according to plan. And I like what you said about, it's just logical. Most of the retirement calculators, at least 5 to 10 years ago and before that, said that you needed to replace a percentage of your salary, of your income, 70, 80% are the common numbers they throw out there. And, when you're making a physician's salary, most of us aren't spending 70% of it. At least, I like to hope I'm reaching enough people to help them realize that they shouldn't be spending 70 or 80% of the, $300,000 or $400,000 they might be making per year. And so, the whole FI math is based on what you spend. That's logical, right? Basing it on your actual salary is only logical if you assume you're living pretty close to paycheck and maybe saving 5 to 15% of it for retirement, which when, you're a physician with good income and also a very late start and usually a lot of debt. And I think we may talk more about some of those challenges later, but you really need to be saving quite a bit more than 5 to 15% if you want to hope to ever retire and maintain your lifestyle.
So after you made the decision that you are going to become financially independent, whatever that meant for you and your family, because that's the definition of that is one thing, but what that actually means in each person's life is completely unique to them. What kind of feedback did you get back from your wife? Was she on board? Did she kind of take the reins of this journey with you? Or was she content just being a bystander? And as long as, you were doing what you say you were supposed to be doing, she was good with it.
Yeah, good questions. And she's primarily a homemaker. She does have a master's in nutrition and did a tiny bit of teaching back in the day. But as far as income, it was one income. So, me saying that I might be done making income was let's make sure this really makes sense. And I shared some articles with her and we talked about it, and she understood the concepts, but she also trusted me. I think there was definitely a very good foundation of trust. And, she knew I was good with money because we had amassed, at that point, a couple $1 million when we discovered the concept. And so, yeah, and then she was excited about what it could mean for us. So what it ended up meaning was that for the better part of 4 years, from retirement until about a year ago, we were traveling, not full time, but 6 to 8 months a year, minus some COVID lockdown time that kept us domestic in our little bubble in Michigan here. But we did a lot of family travel all over the world, and she was super excited to do that. And now our kids are in school in person in 7th and 9th grade, finishing that up now. But they still have another 3 and 5 years to go before they'll be done with high school. So we're locked into a school schedule and we can't travel nearly as much. So we're glad we took advantage of the opportunity that we had to, take the kids out of school for 4 years, I guess, and do the things we did. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one thing that I don't think necessarily gets promoted enough is that we think we have our kids until they're 18. And so we think, okay, well, I could just work a few more years, then, they're going to be 14 or 15, and then, we can bond a little bit more before they're adults. But that's not really how things pan out, because when the kids are 13, 14, they start naturally, we just might not be aware of it as parents. They start to distance themselves from us a little bit to try to find who they are on their own, and venture out in the world as their own being instead of like as your children.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not wanting necessarily to be around you all the time.
They need that, right? So we figured those middle school years were a perfect time to take that leap. So when we started traveling, I guess they were 9, maybe 8 and 10, 9 and 11, somewhere in there. And that was a really good age. Yeah.
Has your mindset or desires or wants shifted over time once you made all these changes? Actually, it wasn't all these changes because you were already well on your way. But once you began your financial independence journey, and whether through knowledge, education, your confidence built up that, this is going to work for you and your family. And maybe if whatever anxiety, if any, waned over time.
I mean, one thing I can speak to, I think that sort of answers the question, is that back when I was younger, like teens and 20s, I used to look at, luxury cars and mansions and, these things that like aspirational things that if I had the money, I would drive this car, or I would, live in this zip code. And then once you have the money, like, okay, I have the option of buying those things.
Mm-hmm.
And we do live in a nice home, and we built a nice home recently. That's always been kind of important to me, but I still don't drive a luxury automobile. And I could afford a small fleet of them. Right. So I think, it's the things you can't have are things that you want. And then once you can have them, it's like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm happy without. Right. And I think that goes, beyond just a money discussion. Forget about money. But yeah, so as far as, once we reach FI and beyond and all that, I mean, well, one thing that I did that really kind of supercharged our finances was start to write about the topics of financial independence, right? So you mentioned Physician on Fire in the intro, which is now run primarily by a couple of other physicians who purchased the assets from me, but I still contribute a bit and advise on the website. But I did make money from doing that, so I had a little bit of a cheat code there that I entered that maybe made us from. At the time I retired, I said I was about double FI. Maybe it only would have been 1.6 or 1.8 FI, but then when I sold the business, now we're again in an even better position. So I guess I should throw that out as a disclaimer, as much as anything, to say that I understand that my history is a little bit different. But even without ever thinking of a website, if all I had done was consume websites and podcasts and worked my anesthesia job, we would have ended up in a very good place without any of the additional side income. So I don't want to give people the impression that they need, especially if there are physicians or other high-income professionals listening to this, that they need some other sort of side gig to make it happen. Doctor jobs pay pretty well on their own.
Mm-hmm. You say doctor jobs pay pretty well. However, there's also a trade-off for that. For most jobs that pay pretty well, the trade-off is either stress, other challenges. What are some of the unique challenges that you experienced in your medical profession as an anesthesiologist that shaped how you thought about your career and maybe impacted financial planning?
Yeah, specifically in anesthesia, it can be stressful. We have a lot of responsibility, and you're also kind of at the beck and call of a lot of different people. When a surgeon wants to get a surgery done, you need to be there. When a pregnant woman is having a lot of pain and wants her epidural, doesn't matter what time of day it is, you need to be there. When the nurse on the surgical floor says this patient's having whatever issue it may be post-surgical, and it might be anesthesia related, they're calling you day or night. And so I think, that's sort of a bit of a lack of autonomy. And I mentioned earlier, it's not a job you can do remotely. So it really does tie you down, and keep you very close to the hospital, both physically and mentally. You're still thinking about, the case you did earlier. You're thinking about, I'm on call so I can sleep, but will I sleep? And odds are you won't sleep through the night. And that's once or twice a week for, decades for most people. For me, it was if you go back to like my education and training and career, it was about 25 years. Only about half of that was the actual post-residency career. But it's a long time, to be invested in one thing. And, it was a good job, solid career for sure, but it never was my identity. And so I felt comfortable enough moving on from it. And 5 years after the fact now, I can say that, I think I made the right choice for me.
Yeah, there are some similarities in that same mindset. You mentioned that being an anesthesiologist wasn't your identity. And me, I'm a retired naval officer. And I see a lot of people either decide to stay in the military beyond 20 years when the trade-offs become less favorable than just retiring at 20 and moving on and maybe focusing on other passions in your life. Because I think it's become their identity, so that they're hesitant or they're anxious to get out and move on. And I imagine you see the same thing in the medical profession. Is that true?
Oh, for sure. And some people fail retirement because they are so, their ego is wrapped up in what they do, and seeing patients is what they do, and being a doctor is who they are. And without that, they feel a little bit lost. And so, that absolutely happens.
So you've been financially independent by your definition for, I guess we could just say retired, because you have not taken on any other major roles for money for 5 years now. Can you talk about that transition from like a year before to now? Like, what was going on and how do you feel about it?
Yeah. And so it's been 5 years in August that I worked my last shift in the hospital as an anesthesiologist. It's been a little over a year since I sold Physician on Fire. And so I considered myself semi-retired for those first 4 years or so, because I did have, I would say I put in 20 to 30 hours. You know what it's like to create content, right? It's what the people see is just a fraction of what you actually spend your time doing. And it was something where we were able to do our travels, and I really didn't alter our itinerary based on, I need to write this blog post. I just squeezed it in. I wrote on planes and, at night when the kids were in bed, or first thing in the morning while our kids were doing schoolwork, and that sort of thing. So it was a very flexible kind of position. But really, I think I've only been like truly retired for the last year or so. So the transition was very gradual for me, but there was definitely a weight off my shoulders when I left anesthesia and felt okay about it. I definitely, for the first 2 years, maintained licensure, board certification, like CPR and advanced life support, all these different like certifications. So I got as much of that kind of like re-upped before I left, so that it would be very easy to return in the first year or two. After a couple of years, you're kind of at the point of no return, especially in a procedural specialty like anesthesia or surgery or interventional like radiology, cardiology, anything where you're doing a lot with your hands throughout the day. A couple of years after not doing those procedures, you're not going to be as good. It's as simple as that, not to mention the what you need to know. But that's a little bit easier to keep up on, and, whether or not you're practicing it. So, and I've also heard that malpractice insurance can be very difficult to obtain if you've been out for more than a couple of years. So I kind of knew I had reached that point of no return after 2 years, and I had no qualms at that point. So I said, no, I'm good. This is going well. Finances are fine. They're going to be fine.
You hear stories about people retiring and then being in the house together, like driving each other crazy. How did the transition from working all those many hours to being at home affect your relationships inside the house?
Well, we got out of the house, right? So, although it may have put us even closer than if we had stayed in the house we had in Minnesota, which is where my last job was. But rather than maybe both being in a 3,600 square foot house, well, we were traveling and spending a couple months in Mexico in a 1,200 square foot apartment, and in Spain in 800 square feet with our kids, and doing things together throughout the day. So we were more together than ever. Thankfully for us, that was not a problem. We get along really well. I feel like we've raised our kids in a way that they are respectful and know to get their work done and to be reasonably responsible for themselves and their actions. So I know what you're describing. It didn't happen to us though. But to that point, I should say it is important to have your own hobbies, your own friends, things that you do during the day that take you, like to go outside, or you're not just sitting in a room all day. Of course, no one's going to spend their retirement fruitfully if that's all they're doing is sitting on the couch, right? And I know that's not what you do. It's not what I do.
You're very grateful for the time that you were able to travel with your family. Can you describe part of your adventure with your family that you will never forget or that you really, really enjoyed?
Yeah, all of it. But and I'm kind of an amateur photographer, so I actually carry a real camera around and take pictures. So I have all the proof and all the photos to look back on. Most of our travels are slow travel. So we go somewhere for 2 to 4 weeks at a time. Initially, we thought we had lots and lots of time, right? So the first trip was the fall of 2019, and we went to 3 different cities in Mexico for a total of 2 months. And then we went to Spain, and we spent time in each of the 3 largest cities over the course of 2 months: Valencia, Madrid, Barcelona. And then COVID happened, right? And so we were kind of locked down. And then when we got back to international travel, it was early 2021. So there was basically about 10 months before the vaccine was actually made and approved and available, that we didn't do much, at least international travel, and not that much domestic travel. But then we felt like, well, our time has been cut short a bit. Now we're down to 2.5 years. And so our trips were a little quicker. I think the first trip in 2021, and of course it was at the peak of Omicron, but as long as we had our vaccine cards and our N95 masks, we were not afraid to go anywhere. And we're allowed to go pretty much everywhere. We spent more like a week in each place. I know we went to Malta and Sicily and Athens and Rome in that trip. And then, my son had braces, so we had to be back every 8 weeks or so. So that's another reason our trips were not quite as lengthy. Probably the most impressive place that we saw in terms of just natural beauty was New Zealand. We spent about 6 weeks there on our last big trip, mostly in the South Island and a week or so in the North Island as well. It's just green and lush, and you've got waterfalls everywhere and fjords, and it was pretty great. But I love the history in Europe, and one regret I have is that we didn't get to spend much time in Asia. That was on our list pre-pandemic, a big 7-month trip. We had 2 cruises, one going over there, one coming back, and like 5.5 months in between to do as we please. And that whole trip just got the kibosh, so it didn't happen. But all of it was great. And yeah, I'll always have the memories, always have the pictures. And our kids, I think, will really benefit, now and going forward, just having a more kind of global awareness, knowing that there's life beyond the borders of our county and our state and our nation.
Yeah, so you've experienced and your family's experienced life beyond the borders and across the pond. Yeah. But your most recent project is you just finalized the building of your own home. And that is a stressful but rewarding adventure, again, I imagine, dealing with contractors and
we had done this once before when I got my first like permanent doctor job. I did locum tenens work, which is travel work for 2 years. And we decided to come back to one of the places that we had worked at temporarily. And while we were still traveling, we were building a home. And that was a little bit tricky because we were a couple states away for a lot of it. And then I worked out a deal where I would come back and work 1 week a month in that town while the house was being built. So I got to know the contractor then and the subcontractors. And it turns out we were able to hire the same builder who used the same subcontractors. Even though we're about 80 miles away from where we built the first house, they live in between. And in northern Michigan, people are used to traveling, 40, 50 miles, just to go to a job. And so, so we were familiar with the people involved in building this house, and they did a great job. It took a little bit longer because we built kind of on the back end of the COVID pandemic, and there were some supply chain issues still being resolved, and people who had been sidelined mostly for work now had, everyone had their stimulus money, the stimmies, whatever it was. The workers were in short supply as well. So it took 16 months to build as opposed to about 9 months the first time we built. But the house turned out great. We're on a lake near Alpena, Michigan, and it's very close to a lot of my wife's family. And it's a good sized house, but not ginormous, not the McMansion. Good size for the four of us. We'll have plenty of space when the kids move out. But, someday maybe, they'll come back, grandkids, whatever it may be. So
I wonder what percentage of people can actually say, if they're building a house, that we didn't really have that many issues.
No, but some of the delays were a little bit frustrating. Getting a well drilled took a long time. But twice now we've had a good experience, and it helps to know the people that you work with. And my wife's family, they worked in building homes and remodeling homes, and so they knew these people as well. And with the first house, they were directly involved, and so it's a lot of things. It's about relationships and people, right? And we have good people and a good relationship with them.
I know you didn't tie your identity to your work, but what do you miss about working as an anesthesiologist, if anything?
I'd say the primary thing would be the people I worked with. Made a lot of friends at different places that I did work and that I did train and I had to get my education. And I'm not the most extroverted person, but I do like hanging out with people, and you get that at work, and you don't necessarily get as much of that when you're not working. So the people would be number one. And I think it doesn't, I'd say I don't miss it as much as most people probably would, but there is some respect that physicians still get. I think a lot less than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. But I suppose in some ways I miss people like looking to me to do this important job for them or for their loved ones. And, I don't really get that in my day to day these days.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you're saying that basically mirrors what I experienced too.
Yeah. And then again, like to me, it's not that big of a deal. Like I don't need that respect. I don't need that validation in my life. And I suspect you're a similar mindset.
Yeah. But it is something you notice. Like after, even you could be, you could analyze it. You can sort of be objective to it and understand where that fits in your personality or the experience side of it all. But at the same time, and you can believe that you're going to be completely okay outside of that, which you are and which I am, but it's still something you notice. Like, oh, well, I mean, I know I'm probably going to sound like pompous or whatever, but like people saying sir to you at your work, like for me as an officer,
oh, sure.
Or salute, or, standing in front of a large group of people, giving a speech or giving training, or just being in that role of authority and respect. And you just don't have that outside and that's okay. But it is something that I do notice. And luckily for me, while I'm very proud of my work, it also doesn't define me as a person either. But it is something I noticed.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of surprised I felt that way a little bit too, because I mean, if anybody can distance themselves or like be stoic or compartmentalize, I'm probably like a pro at it, probably to a detriment. But it's still something I noticed going through. I'm like, oh, I kind of do miss that a little bit. I'm not. Maybe I'm a little ashamed to admit it, but yeah, I do miss it a little bit.
Well, sure. And like I have a new job. I'm the timer for the track events at the high school and middle school. So I've worked at 4 afternoons, and I'm done for the year. I'll probably do it again for them next year. But basically, the track coach saw me taking pictures at one of the meets, and he's like, and my wife is already a volunteer coach for the middle school. And he's like, hey, do you think you'd come hang out with me next time? And I'll show you how to run this computer and camera system. And it's pretty neat, actually, the way it works, where people cross the finish line and you capture each one, then you assign a time and make sure it gets published to the website and out in real time and all that. And it's actually really intricate, and you're like the rate limiting reaction in keeping the meet going, because it can't continue until you've assigned these times and make sure you can excuse these runners and get the next ones lined up. And so, but so I'm working that job now. I did it yesterday, and these kids are just like walking right up to me. Hey, can I scratch that? And I'm right in the middle of like, focus on this computer. It's just like, hey, you. I'm like, I talk to someone else. I can't. I don't know. But right. So people don't. It's not like, excuse me, Dr. Dahleen, could I please? It's either like, hey, I don't. Hey, but this kid said that. I don't know. It's not me. Not my problem.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody else. I'm not the authority anymore.
My next question would have been, even though you just answered it, would have been, do you ever see yourself returning to the workforce in some capacity? But now that I know that you're employed,
I'm going to make dozens of dollars per year doing that, right? Yeah. So I don't think that really counts. But yeah. So as far in medicine, I think I've already answered that too. That ship has sailed, which is fine by me. Although we do need good doctors, so I don't want to convince too many of them to follow in my footsteps. But I do think it's important to get your finances right. And I love the freedom and flexibility I have. Every morning I do, some body weight exercises. I've been running consistently. This year, all year, and most years for a good part of the year. Just, you have the time to, get a little bit of fitness in and work on fun projects and things that you want to get done. I just installed a garage door opener on our house across the street, which is the one we had while we were building the house, and now it's a rental, but it had a manual garage door on the attached. And, I don't want people to have to lift that garage door up manually and close it themselves. And now they can push a button. To have time to figure that stuff out. I added a couple outlets in there too, because it was, you needed one on the ceiling and kind of needed one on another wall too. Anyway, just to have the time to do those kind of things. I don't want to be tied down to a 9 to 5 or a 6 to midnight, which was the anesthesia job quite often. But there are always little opportunities that may come along, whether it's something that I choose to do. Like, here I'm doing a podcast, not a paid thing, but you find things to fill your time that are fun to do. And so I wouldn't want to take 40 plus hours of my week and, direct that towards something that's going to make money that we don't necessarily need, if it's going to take away from the things that I enjoy doing for myself and for my family.
When I first found out about the financial independence community and going to different blogs, trying to read up, trying to get smart on certain things, I stumbled on like the different types of FIRE, and your site kept coming up as an advocate for FATFIRE. I don't know if that was how you originally intended, or you're just reflecting your own journey and then how that fits into the framework of the different types of FI. But can you describe what FATFIRE is and how it differs from other forms of financial independence?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think that is what I was going for when I started writing about it, because as a physician, we enjoy a good salary. And I also knew that I spent more than the average household, even as a quote unquote frugal physician, compared to peers. I was spendthrift compared to, the average family. And so FATFIRE was a term that I wasn't familiar with when I started the site. I discovered it via a Reddit. I think there's a Reddit group, FATFIRE. And I was like, oh yeah, that does fit perfectly with what I've been kind of talking about. And essentially what it is, you can look at it a couple of different ways, but it's FIRE for higher spending people, more or less, higher for typically higher income people as well. And some people look at it as like, well, it's maybe spending twice as much as I shouldn't say twice as much. Just a higher level of spending compared to, when I first started reading about FIRE, it was mostly be frugal, be really frugal, save money. And I focus more on the earning side and be reasonable with your spending. But FATFIRE for a family might be spending $100,000 plus per year, therefore having at least 25 times that, meaning 2.5 million plus as your nest egg. Or it can mean to some people like having a lot more than you need to be FI. So maybe you're not spending quite six figures, but you have 5 million plus in the bank. And so you have 50 plus years of spending. And some people look at that as being FATFIRE. But ultimately, it's just a bigger number, whether it's the nest egg number, the spending number, both. It's just the financial independence piece without an emphasis on frugality, on absolute frugality.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned frugal physician. I was wondering, as soon as you said that, I was like, I wonder did he debate that as a URL or a blog name when he was going through physician on FIRE?
I did. And now there is a gal, Dr. Disha Spaeth, who took that moniker, made it her own. And I've told her before, I did consider that. And I didn't use it because I think it pigeonholed things a little too much. Because that wasn't really what I was about. It was more about the financial independence piece and having options, in life. And frugality plays a role there, but it's not frugality for frugality's sake. And most people with higher incomes don't want to be, preached on the topics of frugality and that sort of thing. They think they're beyond that or above that. I don't necessarily agree, but I was worried the name might turn off a large portion of my intended audience.
Yeah, I agree. I think when we hear the word frugal, the very next word that comes into mind is cheap. And that's just the way things have been framed. I don't personally believe that either, but I do understand that that's the logical next interpretation of that word from a majority of probably people who are using search engines to find information.
Right. And, my audience doesn't really have a need to be overly frugal, right? Clipping coupons might feel good to those of us who enjoy getting a good deal, but it's not going to make a big dent in your path to FI when you're making multiple six figures a year.
We talked about your FATFIRE and we talked about your profession. And so it's a logical overlap of the Venn diagram of like, if you're going to start a blog, this is the kind of blog that you would start. But what did persuade you to start Physician on FIRE? And has it met or exceeded your expectations, or did that change over time as well?
I didn't find a FIRE blog speaking to really what I was looking at and thinking about. So again, now I started the blog in early 2016. And at the time, there were only 3 or 4 other physicians writing about personal finance of any kind. And none of them were talking about financial independence much at all. The white coat investor, who became a mentor and friend of mine, Jim Dolly, he had one article that said 14 reasons not to retire early, something like that. And outside of the physician blogosphere, which was very small, there was the FIRE blogs, and they were primarily frugality based. Mr. Money Mustache at the time was spending $25,000 a year for a family of 3. And, the others were really in that 40,000 and under spending range when they would talk about it. And I was like, oh, we're spending, at least 1.5, 2 times that. And that's after having all of our debts paid off and everything else. No mortgage, no student loans. And so no one's really talking about FIRE from a, normal to high normal kind of spending range. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wanted to create. So, it was, a success very early on, and just a lot of people I think it resonated with. It was a message that wasn't out there so much. And, yeah, it was one of those things where I told my wife, I said, yeah, I think I want to do this. And she said, go for it. And I said, well, you tell me when I'm spending too much time on it, because I know it. I know how I am. I kind of dive in, to the deep end head first. She's like, well, I already know you're going to spend too much time on it. Just do it. Just, give it a shot. If it pans out, great. If no one ever finds it, at least you tried.
Yeah. What's been the most rewarding aspect of building and maintaining the online community focused on financial independence?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely the people, the community, the people that you find and meet and get to know, that become lifelong friends, and yeah, we've definitely visited folks when we've been out traveling and had meetups with other people that we've met through the FI community in different places, different parts of the world, and people have come and visited and stayed with us, and we've stayed with them. And I know I've invited you and talk to you about having you and your family come out and see us in Michigan. So I hope we can make that happen.
Me too. At this point in your life, you've had your career, you've met your financial objectives, goals. What's next for you? Like, is it just sit back, relax? Do you have other things that you want to do? I believe at one point you had invested in a brewery. Is that still a thing? And like, what entrepreneurial endeavors do you think that you might want to get involved with going forward, even if it's not for money specifically?
Right. The answer to the brewery question, yes. Invested as an equity shareholder in one that actually changed hands right around February 2020, I think, right before the pandemic, which at the time I didn't realize it, but that was good timing on their part. And I loaned money to another brewery that just changed hands, and so I'll get a little money back on that. So that's pretty much done, although I got more than my share of free beer out of those deals. And that was fun. As far as what's next, I don't have any big plans in terms of businesses or anything of that sort. You listen to, what's the podcast, How I Built This, with Guy Raz. I don't know if you know that one, but yeah, it's good. But he talks to founders and CEOs of usually like name brands that you probably have heard of, or if you haven't, you probably will at some point. But really just about, where this idea came from and how they enacted it. And, he always asks if it was luck or skill that, led them to where they are today. But I don't have any grand plans of anything like that. I'm going to run my second marathon this fall, Twin Cities Marathon. And we've got these kids that keep us pretty busy. Like today I made Rice Krispie treats for their fall or for their end of the year banquets, both of which are this evening. I'll have to jump from one to the other. One junior high, one high school. And just keeping up with them. We've got a trip to Peru and Machu Picchu right when they get out of school in June, and we're going to August with them and some family we're going to Alaska in August. So little trips while we can in the summertime, and then just getting these boys through school. And then I think the next chapter, next big phase of our lives, my wife and me, will be when we have that empty nest and have the freedom again to travel for longer stretches of time, which will be exciting.
I think, we're two males. We're probably roughly the same age. I'm not sure how old you are. I'm 46 and my son is 10. So I think about what, Wi-Fi, like if anybody's listening to this, and particularly from the father standpoint, like, I don't know how many times a week it crosses my mind. Like, I'm so glad I'm not working because I can do this with him, for him, or around him. And I would not be able to do that if I had to go to a 9-to-5 or longer.
Or it'd be much more difficult, my wife and I are juggling, these school schedules, and, she sometimes does some childcare for a toddler in the family, and neither one of our kids is driving, and they go to two different schools, and their school starts super early, like 7:20. And we said, no, we're not doing first period because that's ridiculous. The bus picks up at 5:55 a.m. In our neighborhood. And no, the kids need sleep, right? So we said, okay, they'll start second period. We drive them in, right? To their two different schools and pick them up after practices. So there's a lot that goes into raising kids, just from the coordination, chauffeuring, making, Rice Krispie bars, whatever, besides all the love and attention and everything else. Yesterday, my younger son had a oral surgery procedure, tongue tie thing. And I was there holding his hand in the dental office while it went on. And that was 9 a.m., 10 a.m. when I'm sure people can get, a half day off work, but you don't get unlimited half days off, right?
Yeah. And of course, he appreciates that you being there for that seemingly or probably somewhat traumatic experience, at least definitely different and stressful experience for him, and that you're there to comfort him, where many dads may not be able to. In my case, just over the last few months, I've been able to coach my son's little league. And that's for anybody who's ever been a coach. I thought I was just going to be like, okay, practice and show up for games. No, it's like a 20-hour-a-week investment of time, not to mention like the mental time. So if I was
dealing with parents as well as kids, right?
Oh yeah. Why isn't so-and-so playing? Well, because they're not that good. Yeah. So yeah, but I couldn't imagine doing that on top of like the mental bandwidth that would be so much more limited if I had a job that, required me to put my energy and effort towards that. So I'm grateful for my son that he's got me there. I'm grateful that, that I'm able to experience that while he's growing up. So for anybody out there who's like wondering, for people who are extremely competent and good at their jobs and they wonder if they should step away from that to focus on family, I'm a huge advocate for that. And it appears that you are too. And so do not hesitate. You can always, if you really miss work that bad, you can always go back after they turn 14 or 15 and no longer want to hang out with you anyway. If you're still competent. If you weren't going to be an anesthesiologist, in retrospect, what would you have done?
Oh, okay. That's a good question, but one that I hadn't thought too much about because it's just what I did. It turns out I like writing, and so maybe I could have been an author of some kind, but it's not really something that you fall into. You don't go to school to become an author. I guess journalism is one route to that, but I don't know if that was ever me. I was always a math and science brained person, and so I think it would have been something in that realm. Maybe engineering. I do like to kind of optimize things and make them as good as they can be and improve things all the time. And so I think I often think like an engineer, even though I don't know that much about the field. And there are many different types of engineers, obviously. But I think that might be a route that would have made sense for me had I not taken the long route of going to medical school and residency and all of that.
When you were going through medical school, did you take on debt, and how did that look for you?
I did, yeah. Like the average nowadays, of course, I finished medical school in 2002, so that was more than 20 years ago. And I had about 60,000 in school debts, but I got through undergrad with full tuition scholarship and some other scholarships, the Bird scholarship. Anyway, I got through without debt from undergrad, thankfully, going to the University of Minnesota, got my Gophers towel back there, stayed there in state tuition for medical school as well. It cost some money, but as compared to most people, I definitely had less debt then, and certainly a lot less than people come out with now, which is about $200K in debt. That's the average indebted medical student is what they have. And even that number is probably a few years old. So I carried that for a while. It was very low interest. And when I took a signing bonus for a job in South Dakota, I just paid it off with one fell swoop, one big check. Said, okay, I'm done.
And you don't regret that? Because I know a lot of people try to if this percentage, I can get this here. Interest rates might be low here. Let me game it.
Right. It's kind of like the paying off the mortgage question. If you have that 2.75%, 3.5% mortgage, you could probably make more money in the stock market or investing in real estate or any other number of things. But I have enjoyed being debt free. That's something that even in building this house, kind of happened while we were selling the physician on fire business. So I was able to pay cash for the build. I know that financially there are, it's pretty easy to run the numbers and see how you could come out ahead. doing things differently, but I kind of like living debt free as well.
If you were advising high school students or young adults considering pursuing a medical profession, how would you shape that work-life balance and financial planning conversation?
Well, one thing that I think has changed as, the millennial generation has come, into their own and with different priorities than like Gen X which is what you and I are. I'm 48, by the way, so I just have 2 years on you. They definitely have different priorities and cherish their free time more and want that work-life balance more than maybe our generation and the baby boomers did. And so they've already helped change the landscape a bit and made the training conditions a little more humane, I would say. And so whereas 20, 30 years ago, employers would not have expected any pushback from doctors on how much they're going to work and what kind of hours they would keep and, how residency would be for them as far as having a day off after call and other things that we maybe didn't enjoy so much. It's gotten better. So I'd say it's gotten better. Not still work very hard, but the job maybe isn't quite as onerous as it may have been when I was coming out. And even then, like they had started to change some duty hours things in residency back in the 2000s. So I think it's only gotten to be a little more of a known entity, and physician burnout is something that everybody is aware of in the medical field. And they're, at least on a surface level, trying to, or at least saying they're trying to do things to alleviate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Taking a big step back away from the medical profession, just as an individual who has gone through this journey, what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone who's just starting on their financial independence journey, let's say in their 20s, and then maybe one piece of advice for somebody who's starting their financial independence journey at the age that we are right now?
Well, for both of them, it's really, I borrow the phrase from the London Tube. It's mind the gap, right? Mind the gap between your earning and your spending specifically, because what determines how long it's going to take. And it goes back to that Mr. Money Mustache article, right? That you mentioned, the shockingly simple math behind early retirement. It's your savings rate. It's the difference between how much you earn and how much you spend. And you can impact that by either earning more or spending less. And some smaller things like, knowing how taxes are paid and levied and doing things to improve your tax situation if you can. But mind the gap. So in your 20s, well, if you want to be financially independent in about 15 years, that means living on about half of your take-home pay after taxes, right? And if you're in your mid to late 40s, as we are, well, you may want, you're probably kind of established in some ways in your spending habits, and they may be hard to make drastic changes there. People do it, but most people would not be able to. So I would focus more on the earning side, especially as a 40-something-year-old who might be more established in their ways. And, if that means changing jobs, even changing locations, if that's an option, which it is, it's going to come with some downsides probably that you may or may not want to live with. But, if you want to retire early and you're in your late 40s, after about 10 years, you're not really retiring all that much early, right? So, yeah, so you got to make up for lost time. And that's probably going to mean earning more and potentially maybe moving to a lower cost of living area if that is feasible.
Well, Leif, you are one of the brilliant minds and cool personalities in the space, having seen you and visited with you at some different events. I appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. And thank you all for watching and listening.